The next thing I want to look at is this whole idea of monotheistic text in Jesus, and in particular, I want us to look at 1 Corinthians 8 through 1 through 6. Now, what's interesting about this text, particularly in the original language, is beautiful structure. In Greek, the text says this: even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or whether upon the earth, just as there are gods many and lords many. And you can see, the beauty of the structure. The so-called gods are being divided into two subclasses: gods many and lords many. And perhaps the gods are in heaven and the lords are gods that are on the earth. But you can see that these two are being divided, so-called gods, into gods many and lords many. And those so-called gods are contrasted. Paul says, again, the beauty of this in the original, there's no God except one, ame heis. Just as there is one God, the Father, from whom all things are, and we are to him, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things are, and we are through him. And if we just read this in English, just to get the context, therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know, and he's probably quoting the Corinthian letter there, quote, an idol has no real existence, and, quote, there's no God but one. So their argument is, look, we can eat meat sacrificed to idols because these pagan gods don't really exist. And then Paul adds, for although there are many so-called gods in heaven or earth, as indeed there are many gods, quote unquote, and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things are, and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things are, and through whom we exist. We can see the structure in the original, no God except one, and you see the word one, and then he starts talking about heis theos, one God, and heis kurios. So what he's done is he's taken this one, and then he's divided it into the Father and Jesus. Now, what does that all mean, and why is it significant? Well, the Jews had a thing called the Shema. And if we want to get at Paul's understanding of Jesus in relation to the Old Testament monotheism, what it means for us today, we've got to understand this thing called the Shema. And the Shema goes back to Deuteronomy 6, and it says, this is the commandment, the statutes and the judgments, which Yahweh your God commanded me to teach to you, so that you would do them in the land where you are crossing over to possess, in order that you would fear Yahweh your God, so that you would guard all his precepts and commandments, which I am commanding you, your son, and your son's son, all the days of your life, in order that you might stretch out your days. And then here is the Shema proper. Hear, O Israel. So in Hebrew, the Shema is Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. It's called a Shema because that's this word hear. Hear, O Israel, and guard them, do them, that it may be good for you, and that you all may become exceedingly great, just as Yahweh God of your fathers said to you, a land flowing with milk and honey. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Now, this YHWH, which I've pronounced Yahweh, is called the Tetragrammaton, the four letters. And Jews would not say the Tetragrammaton out loud. Instead, they would replace it with the word Lord. And we follow that same thing in the English translations. Whenever you see capital L-O-R-D in an English translation, what they're telling you is that underneath that in the Hebrew text is this word YHWH. Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So it says, you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I'm commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall incisively teach them to your sons, and you will talk about them when you sit down in your house, when you go on the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them on your hand as a sign, and they shall be in front of your very eyes, and you shall write them on your doorposts and on your gates. So Jewish people take this very seriously. And this is a copy of the Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. They capitalize this letter and this letter because those two together spell out the word witness, and they want this to be a witness. Blessed be the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. You will ahavta, you will love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the Shema says, say the Shema when you get up, when you lie down, when you walk in the way. You can go on Amazon.com and buy a handwritten copy of the Shema. You can buy jewelry, Shema Israel, Elohim, slightly misspelling the word God to not profane his name. Adonai Echad, the Lord is one. You can get the same thing in a necklace here. You can get it in a ring, all showing the seriousness of the Shema. A Jewish person, by the time they were 50 years old, may have said the Shema 10,000 times, 3 times a day for 50 years. They would bind these things, and in that little box is a copy of the Shema, and in the little box on the arm is a copy of the Shema. If you've ever been over a Jewish friend's house, they'll have a thing called a mezuzah, and in that mezuzah is a copy of the Shema. Jesus, when asked what's the greatest commandment, Jesus quoted the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love, ahavta and Adonai. You will love the Lord your God from your whole heart, your whole soul, from your whole mind, from your whole strength. And this is the second. Love your neighbor the same way you love yourself. There is no other command greater than these two commands. Again, he says this is the first and great commandment. Now, what's interesting about 1 Corinthians 8, 1-6 is that Paul is alluding to the Shema. He says in Corinthians 8:3, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. He's saying, look, you Corinthians are using theology to justify eating meat sacrificed to idols. Will know up front that knowledge puffs people up, but love builds up. If someone thinks he knows something, quote unquote, he has not yet come to know it as he should. But if someone loves God, you will love the Lord your God. This one has been known by him. And then he quotes, we know that an idol is nothing and that there is no God except one. And you can almost hear ringing in Paul's lips as he got up in the morning, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Paul has in mind here the Shema. But what's interesting is Paul has contrasted this no God but one with the so-called gods. And that in and of itself was exactly what you should expect. It's what's there, no God but one, and contrasting that with the so-called gods. But you've seen that he splits the so-called gods into two groups, gods many and lords many. And those are on one side of the equation, contrasting no God but one. Well, Paul's doing the same thing. He's contrasting the gods many with one God. They're so-called gods. These are all untrue, false gods. Gods many contrast to the one God. But he also says one Lord. And you think about what he's doing. He has split the Shema. And he's applying this half of it to God the Father and this half to the one Lord Jesus Christ. So he's got a line that divides conceptually between the things that are true God and the things that are false God. And clearly Jesus is on the true God side. And if you're interested in this, there's a very good doctoral dissertation at Oxford University by a man named Paul Rainbow on Christology and monotheism. And he looks at 1 Corinthians 8, 1-6, and he comes up with exactly this thing, the dividing between the true God and the false God. And Jesus is clearly on the true God side. So you have so-called gods, no God, but one God's many, Lord's many, one God, one Lord. And who is Jesus? Well, Jesus is included within the concept of the one God of monotheism. Jesus clearly is not outside of the concept of the one. He is inside the concept of the one God of monotheism.